Hi everyone. I'm just looking at the chat here. Can you guys confirm that you can hear us okay? Okay, perfect. Great. All right. Let's see if the connection catch up, Thomas. But yeah, I'll have the chat open. We also have Alejandro in the background that's kind of doing all the technical stuff with the webinar. So yeah, feel free to drop some message if you feel like we have some kind of connection issues or delay. But yeah, I'm super glad to have Scott who's with me here today. And with further ado, we have a bit more than 40 minutes ahead of us. So I'm just gonna start sharing my screen. FYI, we're gonna use a deck, but we're not necessarily gonna go through every slide or have some kind of monologues. The idea with Scott is really to bounce some ideas and exchange some experience about how we used to work with AI before AI and with AI now, and also share some of the real use case scenarios before and after. And then obviously we really want this to be engaging, so feel free to participate in the chat with us and ask any questions on at the meantime. So I'm going to share my screen, entire screen. Here we go. Can you guys see the screen? Perfecto. Cool. So this is the agenda. Obviously, we'll start with a quick intros from Scott and myself. Then we'll look at the context and the goals of ideal customer profile and ideal buyer persona mapping. And then we'll just look at, how did we do it before and after. We'll look specifically at 3 steps of the process: the value prop, the ICP verticals and key accounts, the IVPs. And then we'll pause with the use case and ask you guys, where do you want us to deep dive with what we can do with AI for the top of the funnel, the tofu, the middle of the funnel, the mofu, and the bottom of the funnel, and also sales enablement. And then if we have time, we'll do some more Q&As towards the end. So let's just get started with the intros. Scott, over to you.
Hey, JB. So my background, I got started in the business world in a marketing agency, dove headfirst in doing some work as an SDR, got promoted to sort of an SDR sales ops role, left, did some ops work, no code automation, moved into more automated lead gen. And the more I started diving into that, the more I started learning about sort of account-based marketing, account-based sales. Kind of blew up. I became a little bit of a thought leader, I guess, about a year and a half ago when one of my posts went viral. And I've been kind of thinking a little bit differently about AI and automation and stuff like this, because I've been in the world of no-code automation, and I think that gives me a little bit of a unique perspective on how this works and why it works than a lot of other people that are just have a less experience automating processes and businesses overall. I'm excited to be here with JB because I think JB is taking a really fundamentally different approach to building AI than most other AI founders and rev tech companies are in the space.
Great. Thank you, Scott, and thank you for joining us once again. So yeah, so my name is JB. I'm the founder and CEO of Evergrowth. I've been in B2B sales for more than 15 years, and I used to be also an individual contributors, led a few sales teams, but eventually started to work with startups in the early stage with a venture capital here in the Baltics, and eventually started my own GTM consulting shops, many people I think in the audience today. And Adrian, JB stands for Jean-Baptiste. It's just JB is much easier to pronounce and remember. And yeah, so eventually I started my own GTM consulting shops. We started with early stage and then grew with our customers to kind of have supporting larger and more complex sales team. We were doing account-based selling before account-based selling was even a thing, and always using the same customer-centric methodology. We also realized at some point that consulting GTM for early-stage startup is a shitty business model, excuse my French. So we also started to invest in startups, and instead of selling our services, we'll take equity. So we did that more than 60 times. We have 5 exits as well. And then by the end of 2023, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, we realized that, GTM automation went too far, and salespeople just basically spammed, not all of them, but many of them just created more noise than value. And we figured that there is actually a way to use AI to enable salespeople and sales team to become more customer centric and be relevant again in communication with prospect. And that's kind of what we did. And since the beginning of 2024, we basically killed the consulting business and converted all our playbooks and frameworks into a SaaS platform. And that's part of what we're going to talk about today with Scott. So let's jump straight into it and talk about the context. So here, what I want to talk about is the different outreach channels and kind of reflect back from early 2000s what kind of happened. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you in the room remember when the Predictable Revenue by Aaron Ross came out, and it felt like the new Bible. Like it's a new way to kind of get meetings, specializing the sales team and whatnot. But also, I think one thing that many people didn't realize back then is that if you look at the email channel, there was just not that much noise. And also, it was the
Yep.
very beginning of social media. So people that were there were actually early adopters. So you were just getting a lot of, interest and connection simply because you had early adopters on the platform, right? And then most of the people were just super busy, connecting with the phone because that was still the most, predictable channel. And a big difference as well on many of the books that people are using today, like the Challenger Sales, Chandler, and Medic, and so on, are actually written in the late 90s or early 2000s, were written when salespeople were information holder. What I mean by that is that for buyers to access information, they had to listen to me. And nowadays, with content marketing, salespeople are definitely not the information holder anymore, and that's why this customer-centric selling is definitely, having much more success than an information where salespeople still behave like they are holding information. And then obviously COVID came, and as you remember, that's when it became like a norm to work from home, and all those office phone numbers didn't really work anymore. We didn't have yet the technology to have direct phone number, and also data became a commodity. So back then, when data was not yet a commodity, so meaning like today's you can get the latest LinkedIn data sets for very cheap, and you have a new competitor from Zoom for Apollo every second day. But before that, let's say even if you had a shitty cold email copy and poor email script, if you had good data, you still had the hedge. And that's not the case anymore. Everybody has access to data for the best and the worst, right? And then eventually AI came out, late 2022, and a few teams started to play with it. But so far, the impact of AI had more damage than anything positive on the sales reputation and also on your prospect, let's say, mailbox, if you look at the noise. And that also, if you look at all of you where we are today versus where we were in 2023, I'm pretty sure today you have way more fluency, even if we don't even talk about our mailbox. But when you look at LinkedIn on different platforms to understand like that's AI bot generated or that's AI generated content, and it's the same for your prospect, right? And that's kind of what salespeople need to deal with. There is tons of noise, and obviously also tons of more security from Google and Microsoft to protect their users from receiving spam. And that's what salespeople need to battle with every day to break through the noise, right? So obviously, cold call is going to be definitely growing channels, and we see tons of teams having more and more success there. And you actually need to train a new generation of talent that doesn't even have the phone button on their smartphone to use that channel. But you also have to use this customer centric approach for them to be relevant whenever they connect with the right person, right? So I'm just gonna pause here. If you guys have some comments, Scott, I'm sure you want to chip in as well and share your perspective. Yeah.
So this is really interesting to me because um, I think what kind of happened is the way I look at this is like the predict. How to put this? In a lot of ways, the way modern B2B sales was shaped is it's like we have increasingly simplified copies of the predictable revenue model, which you can kind of throw the demand waterfall model of MQL to SQL to SQO to customer along with that in parallel, because a predictable revenue model does make more sense if you're in a salespeople, not salespeople holding the information, because then, like, hey, there's a very good reason for you to opt into white papers if the company has the information. Today's a little, and so there's a whole other conversation around demand gen, some of the stuff Chris Walker's been saying. But I think the bigger picture is that essentially, when salespeople had to manually research accounts, that required a lot of thought and engagement. There's a lot of, you take the time to do a little bit more of that research. What's really happened, I think, to outbound in the last 8 years is companies have run their go-to-market on incredibly oversimplified outbound strategies. And I know, because I pitched this, like at the time this was new, it was like, hey, you can segment off employee discount, title, and industry. And that was cool. And now, when you start actually looking at those accounts, GetRev AI has done some of this, like 50 to 80% of the people that have the right title, industry, and company size are crap prospects, and they're going to have much, much lower close rates. So I think what's happened is, like, we came up with this model that we scaled, and I think we realized, wait, actually this is not this simple. And then this is part of the reason I'm excited about today's webinar is, like, a lot of people that, AI SDRs were a big thing. And most AI SDRs are simply scaling up this old, broken, oversimplified model where we're going to send a bunch more emails to people with the right title, company, and industry, company size and industry. And the reality is, it's not that simple. Account-based selling is a lot more complicated. And so what we really need is, we need to have what we're really trying to do with all of this is, we're trying to have a really detailed and nuanced way of understanding what are the jobs to be done of our ideal customers. What do they actually need? What do they actually care about? How do we deploy that at scale? And that's why I'm excited about Evergrowth, is you guys have built out an account-based selling methodology, which is very similar to one I kind of hacked my way to on my own. And then we scale up that really thoughtful, customer-centric methodology using AI.
100%. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. So let's just move on with the context and, look at what specialized sales team used to be like when, like you said, like salespeople used to do, all the different steps. And obviously back then you could actually have simple filters to build your TAM. You still had to crunch the data and do the leads enrichment, right? So that was like one part of the sales process that was predictable, where you had one simple target. That was number of leads that match your ICP. Then you had the typical SDR functions that was in charge of, middle of the funnel. And then you will really create value. And that was the old specialized sales team that have helped more than 100 teams to implement, where you had 3 roles and 3 KPIs: top of the funnel, number of new leads, a number of meetings, and then obviously, deal close. You could have, simple CRM processes to recycle your TAM. And obviously this worked for a long time, but then we automatized many parts. We pushed too much data that was not clean, and eventually we kind of, killed that model. And that's kind of bringing us back to what you were saying earlier, and I would just want to pause on this one. On what used to work is, when we started implementing the fully specialized sales team, when the predictable revenue by Aaron Ross started to become more and more popular, is we had people that were full sales cycle that were training SDRs. And what was very good when you had full sales cycle rep that trained the first generation of SDRs is they had this really deep customer knowledge, this really deep process knowledge, and then they were giving it to an SDR that support them as the first part of the pod, right? And here we had some really good success. As we talked, we also did this super targeted ABM campaign, so account-based marketing, where it was all about, quality outreach, and obviously there was less noise as well in prospect mailbox and whatnot, but that was also a fact of the success, right? And because everything was driven around customer, centric interaction, you had more success, and obviously we had positive CAC. What obviously went wrong is, I'm not pointing finger at anyone, but what happened is you had generation of SDRs that were training new generation of SDRs that were training new generation of SDRs, and we went way too far from the customer knowledge, and people that were doing outreach or in charge of top and middle of the funnel didn't really understand the customer as, how people used to, full sales cycle rep used to understand them. And obviously, because of scale and scale and scale, many teams became more on fully automated campaign where the job of an SDR was just to click buttons instead of deeply understanding and discovering or trying to calibrate customer pain point. And tool-driven processes made it very generic, and obviously we had negative CAC. And I think over the past 2 years, you have seen a lot of companies having this type of layoff because the math didn't add up anymore, right? So I just Scott, just to bring back on what you were saying, I think it's some of the points here you already mentioned already in the previous slide.
So the thing that I think is worth adding as a real nuance here is that at the same time that SDRs started training SDRs, the full cycle AEs became increasingly anemic. A story I've heard in virtually every enterprise sales team that I've talked to is as soon as you remove a serious pipeline target from the AEs try to find ways to hit their number without prospecting. And then that kind of creates this vicious cycle where there's not discipline around prospecting. And then what ends up happening is like AEs don't want to take opportunities unless there's already an active project at the account. And that just doesn't work. So what ends up happening is you have a very small subset of full cycle sellers and incredibly sophisticated VPs of like very experienced VPs of sales development. And the average AE has no idea how to actually talk to cold prospects. And they actually actively resist talking to cold prospects. And at the same time, you have unsophisticated founders and chief revenue officers and sometimes marketers that are just, they see the SDR role as simple. They see it as a commodity. And so they just try to throw volume and automation at it. And of course, and what undergirds all of this is people don't understand that a lot of the LTV of a customer is actually based on those deeper fit elements, which are not well captured in something like Zoom Info. One of my friends took a look at a major sales engagement platform. They came to him saying, hey, we need to find more B2B tech companies. And what he showed them was like, actually, B2B tech is not your niche. You work well, like for this, you've heard of this company. It's a major sales engagement platform. They had twice the close rate when the prospect account had both a sales enablement and sales operations function. So this is kind of the thing where when you have this over specialized model where people are not where the revenue is not holistic and focused on the customer enough, it actually breaks pretty much everything. From the AEs lose subject matter expertise, the SDR role gets sidelined and oversimplified, and a lot of bad fit customers end up getting closed. Well, and at the same time, the marketers are just optimizing for cost per lead. And so by now, like the average sales team looks at an MQL as functionally useless, right? So it essentially equivalent to cold prospecting. So it's this, it essentially broke the entire, the entire funnel is now broken.
It is. And hopefully, I mean, there is 3 different ways to look at AI, and today we're going to talk about AI enablement. And we always need this kind of reset every time you kind of scale one thing too fast, and I think that's kind of where we are in the market. And I think another way, and just moving forward, to look at what happened if you want to compare, what the customer-centric versus the self-centric approach or product-centric approach is. This is what salespeople used to call prospecting, right? So you put a tool with databases, you get emails, you copy-paste templates from the internet, and you have all these one-sided automations that make salespeople life easier. And then if you put yourself in the shoes of the prospect, at some point they just realize they're in a sequence of automatic emails where there is a few variables, and that kind of didn't make them get back to you anymore, right? So what we did when we did that is we had it already a bad reputation, and we kind of almost ruined it. And the question we asked ourselves is like, so how can AI enable salespeople? And one way to look at it is we can build an AI infrastructure. We can send to book 78 meetings with this kind of conversion rate. And I think Scott and I have seen many people on LinkedIn bragging about how many thousands of emails they send every week, and eventually get a few meetings, and you're like, what are you doing, right? You need to buy hundreds of domains to kind of, scale this. That's definitely not the approach we want to take with, sales and sales enablement. I saw you laughing, and we looked at this slide before the webinar, Scott. So I guess you want to also had your experience on what you have seen with this space with AI, SDRs, and all the type of automations, right?
So I have a bit of a unique perspective on this because I kind of got to ABM having been a strategic cold email agency. Like I did a lot of I did some of Clay's initial outbound 2 years ago. I was familiar with Clay before it was cool. And the thing that's like, I love Clay to be clear. I deeply respect the team. There's a lot of smart people in it. And it's in a lot of ways, it's going to be a part of the GDM stack going forward. But the problem is, by default, if you don't understand your ideal customer profile or ideal buyer profile, like you have to bake that knowledge into your prompts. You have to bring that knowledge to the tool. And I think what's happening is you have this whole generation of like inexperienced SDRs or marketing ops people that are going to agencies and they don't understand business cases, they don't understand business drivers, they don't understand jobs to be done, they don't understand how executives think and operate, they don't understand how business initiatives gets built, they don't understand how to build business cases, and so they have no idea how to actually do a nuanced and thoughtful and scalable account-based motion. So my lens for this is always, I want to find what the best people in the world are doing on a very, very low, very, very manual, unscalable approach. I think Jacob Karp is probably one of the best guys to follow on this. I like Kristen Connors as well. What are the best people doing in a very personalized way? How can we replicate like every single sort of prompt or framework or information step that those people are doing? How can we replicate that with AI? And that's why Evergrowth is interesting to me.
Right. Thank you. So let's go to the nitty-gritty of what we want to talk about in the webinar on how can AI really enable salespeople, right? So the way we look at AI, obviously prospecting is hard, understanding your customer is hard, and that's why you need to do the fucking work to understand who are your customers. And granularity is even more important because today, buyers and prospect will expect that you actually understand what they are doing when you reach out to them. They don't have patience anymore to kind of listen to 100 generic sales pitch that are, product centric. The noise has created fatigue. And I think John was just saying in the chat that, email provider had to step up their, security infrastructure to kind of filter spams. And that's just because, again, that just people were avoiding mailbox, and at the end they had to protect their users eventually. And if you can do this, then you would be able to describe your customer problem better than they can, and that's the key. Because if you're able to do this, they will automatically think that you have the solution. But to do it granularly at scale, that's actually what we used to do as consultant. That was just so time consuming, so unscalable, and it worked. We did this for almost 10 years. But now with AI, it just brings another level of speed, and another level of quality, and how we can make this happen, right? So, and that's what is essentially the customer-centric approach. So the goal really, when you want to look at ICPs and IBPs, so again, IBPs is ideal buyer persona, is really to align all your team with what are the ICP verticals, what are the key accounts, what are the personas that we want to go after. So they can be customer-centric and not feature-centric, right? So it's not anymore like needed to kind of train people to be expert about your features, but it's very, very, very relevant, and even more than yesterday, for your salespeople to understand very deeply the different level of granularity you have with your persona, right? And also have super clear qualification, but also disqualification criteria for accounts on contact, and eventually use this, foundation as a tool to estimate your TAM and work with some kind of account-based selling tactic. I don't know if you want to add anything to what we just said, Scott. Yeah.
So the way to think about this, I think the alignment element is absolutely critical, because there's so many times we've had this issue with clients, unfortunately, where you go in and marketing's going after one group, sales is going after another group, SDRs are going after another group. And if you don't have alignment that's customer centric on who you're talking to, the whole funnel breaks. I think the other thing, the way to think about this, because this is kind of the how, but the way to think about this is think about this from the prospect side. You want the prospect to feel completely understood by all of your messaging on all mediums. That's really the holy grail of what we're trying to do is we're trying to accomplish omni-channel one-to-one personalization. How does this prospect feel like I completely understand your challenges in your job function, in your industry, in a business with your business attributes? How do we bring that level of specificity to our outreach and to our messaging and to our sales processes? How do we make the buyer feel like everything they're getting from us fits them like a glove? That's what we're trying to do. And this is kind of the foundation of that. You can't have having personalized messaging that's rooted in some, like throwing stuff into Clay for unthoughtful prompting. That's, I saw you went to this college 2.0, right? That's, hey, I saw you just started. I saw you just raised funding. That's how to go to college 2.0. And that stuff fails and doesn't scale because it's rooted in data you can find versus business problems that are important to me. And so I think that's really the heart of this is how do we zero in on what each individual person actually wants and needs and cares about? That's the goal of this. And that's the potential with AI is we can actually do that in a much less time expensive way with AI in the mix.
100%. So we have about 15 minutes left. So I'm just going to fast forward to the part where we compare what we did before and how you can use AI to kind of do it much faster, right? And again, like without AIs, like you will spend, if you want to do it properly, and I will show you a template that you can use if you want to do it manually, it will take 1 to 2 days to fully map ICPs and IBPs, right? And it was super laborious and scalable. When we were consultant, we had to take, people that were customer facing for, the most senior customer facing people that had this deep customer knowledge, put them in a room for as many hours as possible to kind of document their common sense. And nobody wanted to get back in that room, even though they understood how necessary it was to kind of align the common sense across the team. And eventually that just ended up that these documents were getting outdated. And you also had so much room for manual errors and human errors because you had this manual interpretation of the documentation, and it would take so long to basically review and categorize companies. So the turnaround used to be very expensive if you didn't have a very big annual contract value, right? And then even though this was great enablement material, it was difficult for salespeople to take a flashcard about a persona and say, okay, that's how I'm going to use it now to contact Scott, right? And that was all the limitations we had. I mean, it worked for many, many years, but these were all limitations, right? And now what we can do is instead of spending days, we can do from 10 to 60 minutes with AI. We can document a full ICP verticals with different personas in a detailed level that was not even possible before. If you use a platform like Evergrowth, and honestly, I don't think there is anything comparable to what we're doing with ICP and IBP mapping. It's 100% scalable. You can update in a few minutes. And then the beautiful part of this is that once you have this centralized customer intelligence about your ICP and IBPs, you can actually then give it to AI agents that can organize your list, right? You can do this like instead of taking weeks, we can actually now with AI agents we can organize 100 companies on contact in just 20 minutes. So that's the speed here is 100x in terms of improvement. And then with the same logic, you can actually give that customer intelligence to co-pilots and role play agents where you can use Gen AI to basically interact with co-pilots with your IBP's definitions, right? So yeah, so that's one way to look at it. I'm sure Scott, you also have some experience on what you can compare here.
So I think the thing that's really critical here is you have to think like if I think about Clay or Common Rune or Zoom Info, all the other tools that are doing stuff in this, like they're doing good work. I think AvaBot is in some ways the furthest along on this. But the problem is this. We're living in a world with orphaned prompts and like really not thoughtful information. Because what you need is AI can do well if you give it context. And the context that you need, basically, we need to train our AI to think like a good salesperson for it to be useful. right? And so the only way for it to be trained to think like a good salesperson is you have to give it all the same information that would live inside a good enablement playbook. In other words, put this another way. If your AI tool cannot house all of the information that would live inside of a mature sales enablement function, if you can't dump that into one place, by definition, that AI is not scalable and will break if it is used too much. So that's
Yeah,
to me, the essence of this is we need to get AI to essentially bake in all of this enablement information. Otherwise, it's not going to work, and it's actually going to hurt sales teams when deployed at scale.
exactly. We're gonna come back to the same issues that we had. Is like, you create this super massive, unique workflow with so much information, and then next time you want to do the same, you need to update. It's like this super massive, spreadsheets with a lot of limitations that, will keep on breaking, right? So that's kind of the goal to use a platform to document what we call the customer intelligence, whereas you have basically the value prop, ICP, and IBPs as the core of that part, right? And just to show you, like, one of the most advanced ICP templates that we used to have, and again, we're going to share access to those templates afterwards, is this is how we used to map, for example, a retail ecosystem. And that might look quite overwhelming because it is. But if you were targeting, let's say, the retail ecosystem, and you were targeting omni-channel retailers that have brick and mortar stores, pure player retailers that sells only online, retail brands like Nike and Bose that sell directly to consumers, but also via different type of retailers, and then CPG or FMCG for people in Europe that just only have brands that they distribute through retailers. And if you target a CMO in this different type of companies, because they have different type of sales channel, they will have different KPIs, they will have different capabilities, and your value proposition must be different. And then so we used to, again, manually categorize the marketing and then have a few bullet points for each, different type of verticals. And that's kind of how we used to do this type of mapping, right, with without AI. And now, just to show you how different we can do this, so let me just quickly show
Can,
you inside Evergrowth. And while you do this, yeah, Scott, maybe you want to add your 2 cents, yeah.
so the my 2 cents on this is like this, if you're working at a smaller or less sophisticated sales organization, like you can kind of wing this for a smaller org, but the point I want to make is this is not thoughtless, right? Every single one of those data points exists because it fundamentally changes the value that the customer receives from a product. This is rooted in customer value. You're trying to quantify all the different ways that customers receive value. Put another way, we're baking the business case that you would need to sell the product into explicit data points. This is how the best enablement organizations were operating. Very few of them, but very few people were doing this because it's so much freaking work. But this is how the best ones were operating. They're thinking very specifically and clearly about, like, hey, what needs to be in place at this organization? What are those 3 to 10, what JB calls qualification criteria, that need to be in place in order for this company to receive value? And for these different segments in this ecosystem, what are the unique ways that they receive value? And you need to map all that stuff out, because if you don't have that mapped, your sales reps breeze over this. And this is how, put another way, the absence of this is how dumb sales outreach happens. Some sales rep doesn't understand who they're talking to, and they start using a talk track that works for pure play retailers when they're talking to retail brand manufacturers. And so they sound like an idiot, right? This is what happens. This is the definition of spray and pray. Is we build lead lists that are too broad, and we don't use it with understanding the customer's point of view. In other words, you avoid spray and pray when you segment your market with business relevant data points. And that is what's exciting to me about this. Doing this manually in other platforms is pretty freaking hard right now.
Yeah.
Because unlike JB, a lot of the people building this, they haven't done this from a sales consulting background. That's, I think, the fundamental opportunity here that we can do with AI is, like, if we have all of this in place, you can have one-to-one truly relevant messaging at scale. But you need to have all of this mapped out and you need to do it thoughtfully. And then your AI needs to bake all of those data points in, otherwise it doesn't work.
100%. Yeah, I think it's very well put. And just to show the difference, and again, that I'm not going to go into a deep demo, but what you can do here to show you how the speed and improvement, you can, start an ecosystem from scratch, or you can select the similar template that I was showing you here on the spreadsheet and just, select a template off the shelf. And what you will get is all the qualification criteria already are preset. And then you also have those instructions here that AI agents will follow when you upload a list, so they can categorize the companies, like I was saying earlier in the chat, in a few minutes, right? So they will be able to categorize hundreds of accounts and contact according to these verticals, categorization and qualification criteria, the same way a person will do it, except that they will do it in 20 minutes instead of a week, right? And then also what AI is super good at doing here, if you prompt it correctly, is it will create this unique business model according to this qualification criteria. And as you can see here, retail brand manufacturer, it explained the core business model, and here it explained the core business model of a CPG, which is very different. And then even just having this granularity before will take us hours and hours, right? And then if you go to the persona level, just to show you as well like how this works. So here, if I have a marketing persona, so again, just to show the difference, right? This used to be like this, and now with AI, within minutes, even less than minutes, I can start mapping responsibilities with a level of granularity that is in precedent, where I have the KPIs. So the CAC KPIs here, it's talking about digital campaign, which channels are most effective, and so on and so forth. But then if I will have the same persona, let me just do this in front of you, for FMCG or CPG, which basically doesn't sell directly to their customers, the same persona will have different responsibilities on KPIs.
And I want to emphasize, like, this is not a replacement for getting someone customer facing to look at this, right? You
Right.
still need to do the work. And if you just have AI kind of slap this together, it's not going to work. But this takes an enormous amount less in terms of brain power to get all of this locked in and nailed down correctly. And that's, I think, going to make it a lot easier for teams to scale up expertise, and be more segmented in their approach. And I think it's going to be a much better starting place. I think in the long term, where this is going to go is each of those elements of persona messaging need to be formulated into hypotheses, where it's like, okay, I think this person cares about this thing. I baked that data point, or I baked that value prop into this cold call script. Here are the times it worked, here's the times it didn't. And I think that's going to be eventually where we go with AI. But for now, no one has this, and I think this is really important. That's where I think things are going to go eventually. Is we're going to start validating. Okay, I think this is our value prop. Let's actually test it. Okay, this did or didn't work. Let's iterate on it. And that's where I
Exactly.
think AI will go eventually.
Exactly. And while this is loading, now we are at the peak time of the OpenAI API, so it's taking a bit longer to generate. Like where, those people with like strong customer facing, let's say, knowledge, their input that will have a huge impact on the output of, this persona mapping is really on writing the challenges or the tasks that these different persona have, right? And while this is generating, let me just pick one other persona here that's already generated. So if we go, for example, for pure player marketing, where the persona is already generated, if you look here at persona mapping for this type of persona, you will see that they have different. You see here, it's only focused because it's a pure player and they only sell online. Here, it's only focused on online channels with SEO, PPC, influencer marketing. And you wouldn't have this for retail brand manufacturers, and you will not have this for FMCG. And then again, because you have done this to a level of granularity, the value proposition. So here, the demo account is based on Trustpilot value prop. Then the value proposition for Trustpilot here will be different for a pure player marketers and a retail brand manufacturer, and eventually the same will happen once this is fully generated for an FMCG and CPG marketing persona. And then again, like high level, this is the foundation of how you can use all this intelligence to then drive other AI agents that will organize your CRM, look for intent as well, with understanding the granularity of your different personas and verticals. And then here, this is where you will have also the possibility to use co-pilots that will help you to do the prospecting and then also do some role play trainings that basically understand your persona to a granular level where you can practice, for example, typical objections that you will get. So if you see here, these are the typical objections that one persona will have when it comes to the value proposition that you have above. And then the typical, it will also help you to have objection addressing. You can also use it to prepare calibrated questions when you are doing the cold calling. And all of this, if you add LinkedIn data, publicly available data, can become even more relevant. And that's how we used to use it in a super manual process with specialized sales team. And AI has basically accelerated that, ability to implement customer-centric sales process, right?
The thing I want to highlight on this is like, this is the foundation. Right now, what's happening is this. Most AI tools rely on a person, the person prompting having all of this in their head. Evergrowth, there's like maybe one other company that's kind of doing this, but Evergrowth is one of the first companies to bake this customer-focused approach into the tool. And I think this is going to become table stakes. Eventually, other tools are going to catch up, but most companies in the RevTech space don't even understand that they need to do this. You need to train the AI to think like your sales reps and be customer-centric. If these prompts don't exist, it's not going to work long term. Your AI is going to break. And so I think that's the thing is we have to build, for us to make this work, we have to essentially bake all this stuff that used to live in an enablement silo and really get this into platforms.
100%. I'm so also being mindful of the time and want to maybe, again, like we'll share the slides, we'll share access to the templates, we'll share access to a GPT that's a super mini version of our platform. And also you guys can request a free demo account. We'll share all the information after the webinars. But I think like if we have a little bit of time for the questions on the Q&A, we can just look at AI from that perspective where this is the minimum gain of efficiency you can have for each part of the process, right? And the difference today is that you will use your value prop, reverse engineer data to kind of calibrate your customer intelligence. You can do Gen AI training, but obviously this part of the process is now, responsible like for sales ops, like they will be responsible to kind of use your customer intelligence to calibrate and use and work with AI agents with minimum 10x efficiency. When you look at the rest of the, middle of the funnel and the very beginning of, top of the funnel, we call it XDRs because you have more and more account development executive, but also like more and more full sales cycle account executives, simply because you get so much more gain with, the two first step of the sales funnel. And then when it comes to BOFU, it's really where you keep on using the same intelligence to run co-pilots that kind of help you to prepare for the calls, follow up for the calls, and handle objections, do, role play training to kind of get ready for the next basically interactions with your customers. And the same recycling methodology can also be accelerated. And these are the different use cases. So I just want to pause here. I know we have already 1 minute, but maybe you can extend for five more minutes and a bit more if you guys can stay on to kind of hear from you guys where you would like us to kind of deep dive for the rest of the platform. So Tofu, Mofu use case, Bofu use cases, all of that can be actually powered by the same customer intelligence.
I think this is great. I think the big thing that I want to emphasize is like the AI has to do this customer intelligence work. If you don't do this, it's not going to work. That's going to become table stakes for scalable AI. And in particular, anything that's messaging facing, like if you're trying to build AVM content, if you're trying to build emails, if you're trying to build call scripts, if you don't have this stuff baked in an explicit way, that is going to catastrophically fail at some point. You need the context. There's no other choice. You need the context.
100%. And so I see a few questions. So typical resort, like, does it vary? So Tamer, like, there is like different ways to look at results, right? So we have two type of approach. I mean, with our customers. Some of them, they just have a typical challenge. Their budget have been cut in terms of tools and resources and headcount, simply because their CAC went through the roof and it's not positive anymore for way too long. So, but their quota is still the same. So their challenges is like, okay, I have 5 times or 2 times less people. How do I reach the same quota, right? So for them, it's like super beneficial to have these AI agents that can qualify and organize hundreds of companies on contact in 20 minutes on demand, right? And then the same as well, like personalized outreach is definitely what's gonna make, and I'm not talking about channel, personalized outreach via LinkedIn, personalized outreach via phone, personalized outreach via email, and obviously phone is today the new blue oceans where that's where you get the less noise. So I will highly recommend anyone to kind of double down on cold calling, but personalized outreach require research, period. And if you use Copilot to do research, but this Copilot don't understand who are your customers, you're still going to get very generic research. But if you use a Copilot to research your customers to do the personalized outreach, then here you're going to have very different results that can help you to actually be relevant when you reach out to these customers. And just to show you here, the first call I had with actually Scott is I showed him his Copilot and how I was and I remember, I don't know if you remember, Scott, but he told me like, damn, I'll reply to that cold email when I showed like what the Copilot was able to generate. So this is obviously our account in Evergrowth. We use our own account. And we have tons of chat there. Let me find Scott Copilot. And obviously a Copilot is not something where you do one command and you get what you want, right? You need to work with the Copilot, right? And get the results that you want. And blah, blah, blah. Help me prepare. Yep, here we go. And that was the cold email that with a few iterations that the Copilot helped me to prepare, right? And then just for you to understand, like this is what the Copilot understands about Scott from his LinkedIn profile, from his recommendations, what's unique about his LinkedIn profile. And the Copilot understands the disc personality of Scott based on how he interacts on LinkedIn. The Copilot understands what B2B Catalyst does, what is their product offering, what they do, and it also deeply understands the pain points and responsibilities on everything we were looking at on the persona before for Scott, based on again how the AI has organized Scott according to my verticals and my IBPs, right? And that's how it can help me to do this personalized outreach. And that type of research, instead of spending 20 to 15 or even 30 to 40 minutes on doing this, I can do it in a few minutes. So if I can do 10 or 40 more personalized outreach per day instead of 5 or 10 that are more relevant, and I don't need to research my leads anymore, then I have this huge efficiency gain, right? So that's one use case that that we have, and then the other use case is like the team is already efficient, and we just increase the efficiency, so they just get even more pipeline, right?
I want to emphasize there are tools that are like inching towards this. The difference is none of those tools have context. I can't
Yeah.
segment, I can't slot a contact into an ecosystem or a vertical or a buyer persona. And that significantly limits what the possibilities are. So yeah.
No, exactly. And you see, like that was like how you can use the Copilot again, like help me prepare what are the objections, and then again the Copilot will understand this, right? So, yeah. And then the power user, so how they are leveraging the tool really is we have different users depending on the size of the sales team, right? So you have some users that have a full, like super sophisticated team where they have sales sub, sales enablement. So they will use it in so many different use cases to enable their team to gain so much time for sales enablement materials. And then you have teams that are way scrappier where you have like one person that does sales enablement on sales subs that is super scrappy on building lists. And here they just basically bring more customer centricity to more like sales automations, right? And then by doing this, they increase that conversion and doing even less outreach. They do less outreach and get more get more meeting, right? So again, it's more bringing the quality, right? So these are just top of mind 2 use cases. Super. So again, just being mindful of the time was super. I mean, we didn't have time to cover everything. I think we're always super optimistic. So I just want to maybe wrap up this session and probably have a few other webinars where we deep dive in some more use cases of how we can use AI to enable salespeople in different parts of the sales process. And again, with all of you guys, we'll share the different, access to templates, the GPT. It's free to use. It's super simplified version of, this architecture of customer intelligence. And then, yeah, you guys can also request a free demo access that we can help you to calibrate, and we'll share all of this with you by email, basically. I don't know if Scott, you also want to, share a few things and give some free nuggets from B2B Catalyst to the audience here.
Sure. The short answer is we take this kind of methodology to your sales, BD, and marketing teams and help you implement, ABM outbound programs to help scale this up. So if you really, the heart of what we bring to the table is kind of it brings agile principles. So we take a lot of this stuff, we build this as a foundation, and we really dive into, hey, how are you generating pipeline and revenue? What are the leaks in your funnel? How do we iteratively build in? How do we iterate on what you're doing and what's working to help solve the bottleneck in the funnel? For instance, and we bring in tech to address that. Hey, our dial to connect rate's too low. Great, let's look at better data sources, or maybe tweaking to maybe you're having dialer issues. Hey, our email reply rate is too low. Okay, well, now let's work on enablement for the reps or email templates or bringing in some tooling. Whatever the case is, like, that's essentially what we do. So we use this methodology as sort of a foundational alignment tool. We then bring in a lean way, what's the one key thing in the funnel you need today in order to drive an increase in revenue and pipeline.
Yep. Thank you, Scott. And also, like, FYI, for if you guys don't have the internal resources to implement, a solution like Evergrowth, this is actually why we team up as well with Scott on his team to kind of support customers that wants to use it but do not have internal resources. So, and that's kind of how we came up having this webinar. So again, thank you again, everyone, for joining. It was really nice, chatting with you, Scott. Thank you for finding the time, and hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Yeah. Sounds good. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Have a good one.